We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Terry Martin, joined by Jeff Berkowitz from Chicago, and we're going to be looking at some of the top stories this week. And Jeff, there's quite a lot of top stories. In fact, I'll share with you folks. We had to be throwing some of the stories out. There just wasn't enough room. Well, one of the big things that we're going to be talking about, Jeff, is the presidential election. And yesterday, Ron DeSantis, we just heard a small clip there from his announcement that happened on May 24th. Here's the Washington Post ABC News poll of the candidates as they are now stacking up. Jeff, you had the opportunity to meet a presidential candidate recently, one who hasn't yet shown up in the polls. What can you tell us about that?
People are going to be hearing a lot about Vivek Ramaswamy. I saw him a week ago today, May 18th, he was at a fundraiser here in Chicago at the largest law firm in the world, Kirkland & Ellis. And Ramaswamy is somebody to think about. He's the first millennial to be running for president. He is 37. Fortune correspondent estimates his net worth at $630 million. He's pledged and spoken of 8 figures of his own contribution. I understand that's at least $10 million he'll put into the campaign. So he's very smart, a lot of verbal dexterity, Harvard Harvard undergraduate degree in biology, Yale Law School. His money was made in biologics and product development in the pharmaceutical industry, an IPO based on some drugs that were thought to be doing quite well. So when you talk about $630 million for net worth, you're talking about that kind of entrepreneurial background that Vivek Ramaswamy brings to this. And I can't emphasize enough how articulate this guy is. He can speak on the issues. He knows how to focus on, what's important. He talks about fighting for a new American dream. He's a cultural thought leader, bestseller on the New York Times. His emphasis is on restoring meritocracy in America, securing the borders, eliminating affirmative action. That's a pro-minority. It sounds like it's anti-minority, it's pro-minority, because minorities want the American dream. They want to be judged on their merits, not on the color of their skin. That takes us back to Martin Luther King, and judge people not on the color or their pigmentation, but on their character. He wants to
and
work
their qualifications. This is an anti-woke mood. Jeff, we're about to get the second black man to lead the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first black since Colin Powell. You don't want people looking at this new general and saying, well, he got the job because he was black. That's the point of the candidate's comments that you're bringing to us. You want people to judge the position you have, that you're there because you're the best qualified person. And tangentially, when a lot of us are looking at the current vice president, very few people are going to be looking and saying, well, she's now the vice president because of all the people that might have held that position. She was the best qualified to step into the presidency. Instead, what are we getting? We're getting people thinking, well, she's there because she is a black woman, which is exactly what Joe Biden announced that he was picking her for.
He's running for fighting for the new American dream. Ron DeSantis is talking about the great American comeback. These are cultural values that America, not just the Republican Party, can identify with. America first, but not to the exclusion of the rest of the world. Pursue excellence. Take on the greatest threat to America, communist China. But as DeSantis talks about, go out and we can't be intermingled as closely as we have been and as we saw in the COVID time with China. So reshore things to unify us with Japan, with South Korea, with other parts of Asia. We have to tie our economies to these growth areas. We have to sell America. What do we have to offer? we have to offer to the developing world growth, the opportunity for all of these countries to do better. That's how we compete with China, which is out there competing. As DeSantis says, we need a new Monroe Doctrine because we have China invading us from South America, from Latin America, with all of these projects that they're selling. So we can't just look inward. We want to have this idea of America first. What is in the interest of America? But we have to be aware of the rest of the world.
Well,
Even
and to your
DeSantis,
point, the Panama Canal, China is taking steps, without going into detail, for them to control the Panama Canal, which would be certainly against the national interest and national security of the United States. And this is, they are all across the globe. They're building naval bases on the Atlantic side. They're not just a Pacific power the way they see it. So, yeah, this, for some of these issues may not be resonating with people if they haven't followed some of the steps that China's taken, but they are critical to hear and consider these issues.
right? And I mean, so you just put up the candidates for the GOP race in the presidential primary. And we want to focus. People will be seeing new other candidates. But this week we had two major entrants into the field. We had Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, and we had, of course, Ron DeSantis just yesterday enter. And so you put up the two big candidates.
Let me bring them up again. And again, here you have Tim Scott on the far right, a black Republican senator, and actually there is also Larry Elder, who isn't really considered by a lot of people as a serious candidate. He's also a black Republican who for a while had considered running for governor of California. But anyway,
Just put that up there again. So the focus of America GOP candidates, of course, on the left, the two top candidates, former President Donald Trump at 51%, and then Ron DeSantis at 25%. But DeSantis really just entered right now. He's said to have at least $100 million. That'll be growing quickly. So, and of course, Donald Trump has the baggage of 6 investigations to deal with. 4 of them are criminal investigations. So he's going to be balancing that and in fact, one of those cases will have a trial starting in March of next year, right in the middle of the primary race. But no question about it, Donald Trump is the leader of the pack in the GOP primary at the moment. No question about it. Ron DeSantis is number 2. And right now, it's those two. And the question is, what does Nikki Haley add to the field? Does Pence add anything? And Tim Scott. Obviously, Tim Scott and Nikki Haley.
Before we go, I want to talk a little more, but let me play before we skip over Ron DeSantis, since the big news was yesterday he announced. Let me play his campaign ad. His announcement got screwed up when they tried to go up on Twitter, as people know. I don't want to spend any more time on that. It's not a major issue. But he did release a campaign announcement. Let's quickly take a look at that so people know some of the issues he's promoting.
Truth must be our foundation, and common sense can no longer be an uncommon virtue. In Florida, we proved that it can be done. We chose facts over fear, education over indoctrination, law and order over rioting and disorder. We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America.
Well, there you see Ron DeSantis. What does he have to offer? He has unprecedented success in Florida. Unprecedented, that's his word. He's in his second term as governor. He won just barely with 2 or 3% 4 or 5 years ago. He won by 20 points. He has transformed Florida into a Republican state. All of the statewide officers are Republican. And he has, well, as you mentioned, he was trying to do this announcement was really unique and unusual with Twitter. Didn't quite work because they had so many, 300,000 or more, trying to be involved in this, they couldn't handle it. But not to worry, because an hour or two later, he came on Fox and did, I'd say this is unprecedented, on that same day announcement, half-hour sit-down interview with Trey Gowdy. If you watch that interview, and people should, he lays out policy by policy what he will be doing. So this is not a superficial analysis. He starts with the big issues: border control, crime infested cities, liberal indoctrination, just as a sort of to whet people's appetite. But Trey asked him real questions and they had a real dialogue.
We should
This
say
was
that
not
Trey Gowdy is a former congressman from South Carolina. He served in the House with Ron DeSantis.
right. And he talked about, Trey asked him, how would you deal with inflation? He talks about the Federal Reserve and how if you have to stop inflating from the Fed. He talked about the tremendous spending during COVID and what the what government fiscal policy was contributing to that inflation. He talks about when you have this pseudo travel advisory coming from the NAACP saying, "Oh, don't be worried about going to Florida if you're a minority." He talked about black students in Florida outperforming black students anywhere else. School choice they have throughout Florida, that is the key to minorities succeeding. They have been trapped in Chicago, in Baltimore, in Los Angeles, in these inner city failing schools. School choice allows them to get out. He is talking about nationally. This might be more difficult to do, but at least it's something inspirational and aspirational that he talks about a national school choice program, scholarships to get these minority kids out of their failing public schools. Chicago, 10% of the black students at CPS read at grade level. That's a terrible statistic. Why isn't the NAACP talking about that? So he took it. Look, when somebody comes after you, this guy has a backbone. He says that on his ads, and it's the strength. I mean, Trump said this is it. He'll stand up to people. Well, if it's going to be Trump and DeSantis is going to make a name standing up to Donald Trump. But he's doing what he's doing in the half hour. This was a 35-minute interview with Trey Gowdy. What he's doing there is outlining a program to deal with the failed policies of Joe Biden. So don't really start by going after Trump. Start by going after, as if you're in the general election. Go after the at this point, the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. Talk about what America needs is somebody to stand up to the Washington Post, to the New York Times, to CNN, somebody who will point out the Department of Justice and the FBI. If you come in as president, don't get fooled into thinking these are independent agencies. They are part of the executive branch. If you're the president, you oversee the executive branch. You oversee Department of Justice, FBI.
Yeah, people know that. What they should know is that Ron DeSantis said on day one, I'm going to fire Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, and that we have in the U.S. House of Representatives, now under Republican control, they have launched a select committee on the weaponization of government and have been holding a series of hearings in which they are exposing the use of the FBI, the use of the DOJ as for political purposes. And we have seen what? We have seen Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago having SWAT teams going down to Mar-a-Lago for documents as if there's going to be a threat and you send in a SWAT team. I mean, these are some of the things that are going on in America today that a lot of people are upset about, and they may not be the traditional issues. And Jeff, just this week, when you talk about woke and you talk about the whole cultural issues, and those cultural issues, more so, I think, than many times we look at the economics, but what's on people's mind is what's happening to the fabric of the company. This week we have Target. In the wake of Bud Light blowing up for putting a transsexual on an ad, this week we have Target trying to market transsexual clothing both to adults and children. And the universe, online universe, exploded So much so that the Target CEO had to say, okay, we're going to take this out of the front of the store and push it to the back of the store. This is going to be an ongoing issue. The revulsion of the American people to a lot of this woke, a lot of this transsexual stuff. Who's pushing these agendas? Why are they having, I can't think of the term, the transsexual, the gay queens reading stories, the drag queens reading
Right.
hour. Someone is pushing this stuff as an agenda, and the American people are having enough of it and fighting back. Now, how much does this jump the party lines? Will Democrats say, "Wait a minute, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not for this"? I don't know. It almost certainly will have some sort of an impact, and certainly this is one of the issues we'll be hearing about.
Well, the trick, and I think Ron DeSantis is doing this at the beginning, if last night's interview with Trey Gowdy is any indication, doing it very well because you need the verbal dexterity to deal with these cultural issues, which are important to America, which are important to attracting moderate Democrats, as well as reinforcing the base of the Republican Party. But you need to balance that out with the concerns. He's going to build a border wall. He's going to take up where Trump left off and say, well, he's going to succeed at this. He's going to be able to, he thinks, come in and have a Congress that he can work with. But you can't ignore, you have to deal with the cultural issues, the educational issues that people are concerned about, but you have to deal with immigration. You have to talk, and he did talk about, look, no asylum for illegal immigrants coming across the border. So don't come across the border when Ron DeSantis is president, because you're not going to be able to apply for asylum. Apply for that, stay at home in Mexico, apply for asylum there, and then we'll deal with it. So he can stand for America what it is, that somebody who will protect those who are persecuted in their country, but we're not going to have 3 million people a year walking across the border and going into the interior of the country without any checks.
Okay,
And
let's
then stand for the other thing, Terry, of course, and you know this, stand for what's important to America, which is our military needs to deal with this economic and military of China. Don't let it be taken over our military politicization of gender issues and climate change.
It's
America needs a
unbelievable that
strong
we're
military.
having these issues discussed on our military bases and at West Point. It's unbelievable that we have the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Milley, who's about, thank goodness, to be replaced. And he's sitting there saying, I think the number one issue we face in the world is climate change. If he believes that, he is unqualified to serve in that capacity. If he
Right.
believes that, he has
Well,
not been paying attention to what China has been doing, which I don't have time to go into, but maybe in a future date. Look, these are all issues. These are some of the issues. We can only scratch the surface. I want to move along, though, because we've had a number of other significant issues we want to talk about. One of them is Lisa Madigan, when she was the Attorney General, in the wake of what happened by an investigation by the Attorney General of Pennsylvania on sexual abuse of minors by Catholic clergy. Lisa Madigan started an investigation to find out what has happened here in Illinois. That was 4.5 years ago. This week, that investigation finally wrapped up. It was announced in a 700-page report by Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who said that they found where the Catholic Church had announced that they had only 150 clergy abusing children. The Attorney General announced that they found far more. And by the way, we should note that the period of time that this investigation covered were sexual abuses of children from 1950 through 2019, so virtually 70 years. Let's listen to a small part of what the Attorney General found.
The Catholic Diocese of Illinois publicly listed only 103 substantiated child sex abusers. Now, by comparison, this report reveals the names and detailed information of 451 Catholic clerics and religious brothers who abuse at least 1,997 children across all of the dioceses in the state of Illinois.
I would say the Attorney General started off by noting that his mother was a very devout Catholic and that he too went to Catholic grade school and that he's sending his children to Catholic school or has.
Well, yeah, and one of the greatest hypocrites I know, our good friend Kwame Raoul, on public affairs many times. So both a friend and somebody who needs to be challenged. Because just as an aside, you mentioned that he went to Catholic schools. You would think he might think low-income individuals, especially minority blacks and Hispanics, should have the same opportunity to take their $30,000 per kid per year that we spend at CPS, especially what's going on there with sexual child abuse, which he didn't mention at all, and take their money and go to their private school, the private school of their choice. But Kwame Rule doesn't stand for that. He says, well, that's my money. I can do that, but they can't take public money. Well, the hell with that. That public money is going to kids in public schools, but they're failing to perform. How does he get away with this? How does he say he is somebody who stands for minorities and he says to hell with it? You blacks who go to CPS, only 10% of you can read at grade level and you can't leave. You blacks and Hispanics who go to CPS and have the similar, if not worse, sexual abuse problems, and he ignores them. Where's the big
Well,
report
two
on
things.
continuing sexual abuse at CPS? Okay.
Okay. And I've known Kwame, the Attorney General, since he joined the legislature, replacing Barack Obama when Obama was elected to the Senate. One of the things you jumped right in, which is a legitimate issue, because this, in the budget, they're taking out the funding for people. It's more detailed
Tax
than the
credit
time we
scholarships.
have to get into, but basically, yeah, they're taking these
School
scholarships
choice.
for school choice out because the teachers' unions don't want them, even though a lot of people, as you say, Attorney General Raoul went to Catholic schools. I went to Catholic schools. I have two sisters that are nuns. I have a master's degree, and I will tell you the best education I ever had was in grade school. If I had stopped there, I could still be functional because of what I learned just in grade school. If we are failing our children, that's all true. On the other hand, I want to say we shouldn't just jump over and ignore the fact that people were sexually abused in these schools. And hopefully, as a follow-up to this report, what we need to find out, whether they are in Catholic schools or CPS or any public schools, we ought to have some mechanization, some way of someone following up to make sure that we're not having children sexually abused in our schools, especially, Jeff, as we just talked about, with this whole push for transsexual, for sex change operations and all. I frankly don't know how this bubbled up into the mainstream of America. I don't know who's behind the scenes pushing these agendas. Because to my knowledge, I don't know anyone who walks around saying, yeah, we ought to be talking more about transsexuals and sex change operations, but here we are.
Well, I'll just say, yeah, I know Kwame. Yeah, he's a good guy. We're not friends. You can't be journalists and friends, but you can be friendly. You and I have been friendly with Kwame for the last 2 decades.
Well, I would say
He's
you
been on
can
my
be
show.
friends, but you still have to be objective. How's that?
Well, however you want to put it, but he's been on my show numerous times. We hope to have him on again. But that having been said, he needs to be challenged on these issues, as does everybody. People on the right have to be challenged from the left. People on the left have to be challenged from the right. But the important point that we kind of slipped over here, it's not just Catholic schools. When we talk about tax credit scholarships, private schools, non-sectarian schools, Jewish day schools. Governor Pritzker's been pushed on that. He happens to be Jewish, been pushed by some of his Jewish friends. Why are you knocking out these tax credit scholarships? So Kwame Raoul, as the top law enforcement officer of the state, should be talking about school choice. If he doesn't want to have it, that's fine, but have him confront that. Have him explain why he doesn't want to do anything in terms of giving an option to kids who are at CPS not learning how to read and write, and also this ongoing sexual child abuse problem at CPS, which I think is gigantic. Whether it's larger or not than Catholic schools is irrelevant. They both should be addressed. The Catholic Church has addressed this to a large extent. Obviously, they've been working on it for more than a decade. or and some would say have dealt with it. What has CPS done? Have they changed their policies? Kwame Raoul, as the Attorney General, should have something to say about that. He should have something to say about school choice. But let's go on. We have a few other.
We have,
Well,
and Jeff,
we should go to the
as
budget.
we're going to go
We
to the
should go to the
budget, Jeff, as we talk here, the House of Representatives here on the 25th of May is just coming in. But what was announced yesterday by the governor is they have a budget deal. Let's listen to what the budget or the governor had to say.
Our record is clear. $10.5 billion of debt paid down, including $450 million in this budget alone to pay off old tobacco settlement bonds, provide additional pension payments, and another $90 million in this budget to further reduce accounts payable. Once at almost $16 billion, our overdue bills have been eliminated. Our empty rainy day fund is now on its way to more than $2 billion. GDP has grown to above $1 trillion, and we've received multiple credit upgrades from every ratings agency.
Over the last 5 years, I would say the finances of Illinois have greatly improved. There's no doubt.
Yeah, but Terry, he's glossed over a few problems. Under his leadership, more than 4 years, no structural reforms, no real attempt to deal with the major pension problems, the $400 or $500 billion Illinois pension hole. Nothing, zeros, nothings. And he doesn't just that. Even the current problem, this is a $50.4 billion budget. You and I spoke about the exploding costs of having free health care for illegal immigrants that went from a $2 million program to a $1 billion expense. They couldn't deal with that. So they instead of knowing that they've got at least $1 billion issue, they accounted for it in this budget, I think. We haven't seen the details, but from what we've seen, it appears they agreed to just put in $500 million for fiscal year 2024 when they know it's a $1 billion program. Balanced budget? Ha. Okay. Making this fiscally responsible? Ha.
Look, I'm not going to
I don't hear anybody
criticize.
talking about that other than us.
There's always
okay?
look. There's problems. We discuss them, and the pensions are a major issue. They ought to be reformed because they remain a debt bomb that's going to explode in the future going forward. I will say, on the other hand, you got to give credit where credit's due, and it is true that when Governor Rauner, going back to the summer of, I think it was 17, when some of the House Republicans voted with the Democrats to override the governor's veto of the budget passed that year, at that time, the number of unpaid bills was $17 billion. And for that portion of the debt that was over 90 days, we were, as taxpayers, paying 12% interest on those, on billions of dollars of past due bills. Now we are current 30 days. They have eliminated, as the governor said, they have eliminated the past due debt. That is a good thing. They are putting more money into the pensions. They do have, as he said, a $2 billion now in a rainy day fund. These are all good things. I don't want to sound like no matter what they do good, that we're not going to accept it and just ignore it. We only have about a minute left, so let's keep that in mind.
A lot of that fix came from bonded debt. That might be a lower interest rate, but they're still paying for that. He can't pretend, as he does, that those obligations have just gone away when they were unpaid bills, and now you have bonded debt. You still have obligations. And you need to talk about it that way. You can't say you're putting more money into pensions when you got a $500 billion hole that you're not dealing with.
No, they're putting more money into pensions than what is mandated to put in.
I understand, Terry.
Well, you can't say. I disagree with the way you phrased it. Look.
Okay, but the big thing
we really have to close out. But
the big word is
Jeff. We got to close out.
Reform.
Thanks, folks. Let us know what you think, and Jeff and I will carry on afterwards. Goodbye.